Welcome to our 12th lesson on the Ten Commandments. If you were here last week, we told you about the storyline and how if we keep the scriptures in the storyline and not let it get it interrupted, not like those flashcards we saw when we were a kid that showed Mickey Mouse being animated, and we see that the Old Testament and the New Testament, it wasn't until about the 14th century that they started putting, or 13th century, they started putting the chapters and verses divided. Like I said, theologians have said the man that did that, and I have his name, I won't give it to you as I said last week, that it's like he was riding on a galloping horse. He did it so clumsily because sometimes Old Testament and New, right in the middle of a thought, right in the middle of a storyline, the chapter stops, and when it does, it's like those flashcards. It kind of makes us pause and stop. Learn to read your scriptures. They're there for us, and it helps. Like I said, John 3:16, easy to find. You can go to John the book, you can go to chapter 3, and you go to verse 16 and show it to someone. It's handy, it's good, but on studying, it can slow you down. Follow the storyline. Let that be an emphasis, if you would, from now on all of your studies, not just with me in this study of the Ten Commandments, but I want you to follow this storyline and progression of the Ten Commandments and in all of your studies, if you would. Now, I want you to go to Exodus chapter 19. And we're going to start going through this storyline. Now, we're going to see and we're going to read that they left Egypt to go to the Promised Land. We saw, and God told us what the sins of the Canaanites and the Amorites were, that he was going to take them out of their land and going to give it to Israel. And so God showed them those sins, and you and I read it, if you remember. We read it last week to look at it. And so here now they've been traveling for 3 months. They come to Mount Sinai. They're at Mount Sinai a whole year. Moses goes up, as I said last week, 8 different times. And we'll see now that I want you to think about the progression a minute. When God called Abraham, he didn't give the law to Abraham, because Abraham believed God, and the scripture says God called it to him for righteousness because he believed God. God tested him and even said, give me your son, take him up and sacrifice him. And so Abraham took his son up and he put him on the altar and he raised a knife, and God said, stop, that's enough. He was just testing him. He would have destroyed his own son because he said, even if I would have done it, Abraham said he was powerful enough to bring him back to life. And so Abraham trusted God. However, the Israelites, who were Abraham's seed, went down to Egypt for 430 years into Egypt, and they learned the Egyptian ways. And they learned the Egyptian sin. Even when they left Egypt, they brought some of their gods with them. These little gods, some of them they could carry and put in their pockets and pray to them, and that they would see power in those. They were in such unbelief and sin because being exposed to the sin of the Egyptians. And God said, that won't work. You're going to be a peculiar people, we said last week, remember? You're going to be a peculiar people, a royal priesthood, a nation of holy people. And you're going to be an example, and you're going to take the heathen and root them out of their land, and I will give you the power to do that. And so now here they are. They've left, been in Egypt 430 years, and they're leaving, but they got a lot of sin to deal with. And so God has to talk to them. Chapter 19, I want to start with verse number 1. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they unto Mount Sinai in the wilderness. For they were departed from Rephidim, and were come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mountain. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now I'm going to pause there just a minute. That sounds kind of unusual when God said, I bear you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. But if you go in the New Testament to Revelation chapter 12, the church in the wilderness there who is hiding from the persecution that's coming from Antichrist, they're hiding, and God said that he took them into the wilderness on eagle's wings. Now, the eagles used to stir up their nests for their chicks so to get uncomfortable, and the nest wouldn't be comfortable, and it kept urging the chicks to fly by themselves. And if they wouldn't, the eagle would push them out of the nest one at a time. And they'd try to fly, and if they couldn't, the eagle would swoop down and catch the chick on its eagle's wing, on its wing, and bring it back up and put it into the nest. Then he'd feed it, be with it a while, and push it out of the nest again. So when you see the eagle's wings, it means God miraculously, as you see, he brought them with eagle's wings out of Egypt. It means miraculously he's taking care of his people. He said, you have seen, verse number 4, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice, indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, a special people. Unto me of all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak unto the children of Israel. And so Moses came, verse number 7, and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. In other words, he went back and said, they said they'll do it. And God said, I want you to obey my voice, and I want you to keep my covenant. And so then Moses goes back to the mountain. If you read the rest of this chapter, you'll see God said, I want you to sanctify them. Sanctify means set themselves apart, wash their clothes, wash themselves, watch what they eat, set themselves apart, because I'm going to speak to them. The reason why he said he's going to speak to them is because he wanted his fear to be in them, so they would obey him. Remember, the scripture says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so Moses goes back, tells God, God sends him back. Remember, he went up there 8 times in that year. They were in the mountain. And he comes back and tells them, sanctify yourselves and get ready, because God is going to speak to you. Now, I want you to go to chapter 20 with me. And we're not going to read this chapter, but I want you to glance at it with me, or write it down and read it later. Put a star by it. And it says, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And God gives them the 10 sayings, the 10 commandments. He gives them the Ten Commandments orally and speaks to them. And then after he gives them the Ten Commandments, the people are shaking and they're quaking. And so Moses comes down and is with them, and God has spoken to them, and surely the fear of the Lord is in them. But it's interesting what they said. They didn't say like they did before with the first message from God. They didn't say all that the Lord has said we will do. They said, Moses, you talk to us. Let not God talk to us, lest we die, because we're afraid of him. You speak to us. You know, we always like to get a man between us and God. You can make your pastor that way or someone else, but I want you to know each one of us are responsible for ourselves. Your pastor is not responsible except to teach you and to guide you and to disciple you and to pray for you. He's there to build you up and encourage you, but it's you that has to deal with God. And so here they are wanting Moses, and if you remember, they were always complaining to Moses. They wouldn't have done that with God, but they did that with Moses because they didn't want God to speak to them. Now, the rest of chapter 20, here's the storyline. Please follow it. Moses goes back up into the mountain, and God gives him some more commandments. And he says, write these commandments down in a book. Now, Moses was educated in Pharaoh's house, so he was taught to read and write. There's no doubt about that. People who were educated, which were not very many, and could read and write, carried with them quills and sort of a pouch with ink in it. And then some of it was powder, and you'd have to mix it with something, spittle or some water, and it would become like an ink. And then they would have a bunch of scrolls, and they would start writing on the scrolls. So God said, write these and put them in a book. Now, he couldn't write a book, and he didn't write a book with glue, but he wrote on these parchments, and they were these parchments, and so they were scrolls. And so Moses wrote all these commandments and started to give the commandments to them. He gave them all the laws. All of Exodus chapter 20 through chapter 24. All these laws, he's writing them down in a book or on these scrolls, all the commandments that the Lord has given him. Now, listen to the progression. I want you to go to Exodus chapter 24. God has given 4 chapters now that he's given them these oracles, these commandments that Moses wrote. These are not the 10 Commandments. These are the oracles of God that Moses was to write down, and it's called the Book of the Covenant, the Book of the Law. And so you'll see that as we progress on. And so I want you to look with me on Exodus chapter 24, verses 4 through 8. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered offerings, burnt offerings and sacrifices, peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took, here's the covenant that he's making, and Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Now this was the blood that applied to the covenant for God. It was on the altar representing God's part of the covenant. And took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord hath done we will do and be obedient. My friends, the 10 Commandments is not part of that. God spoke to them orally. He gave them verbally, but he hasn't given it to them in writing yet. They're not in this group. Go to verse number 8. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, Behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord made with you concerning all of these words. And Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 elders of Israel. Now Moses goes up again to God. Now he's given them and read all of these laws to them. They said, all that the Lord has said, we will do. But remember I said, the Ten Commandments was not part of it. Now look at verse 12 of that same chapter. And the Lord said unto Moses, Come up to me into the mount, and be there. And I will give thee tablets of stone, and a law, and commandments, which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. That you may teach those 10. Now, God gives him these 10 laws, these 10 on a tablet, or not on tablets now, but they're on these tablets of stone, and God gives those 10 words, 10 sayings. We can say it, 10 commandments to Moses. They were not given to the Israelites except verbally in the beginning of chapter 20. This is verse 24. Now God has made a covenant with his people, but he made a covenant without the 10 commandments. Notice he sprinkled of the blood, and this was the 10 commandments. And then in that same chapter, God says, Come up and I'll give you the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments was not part of the covenant. Now, why isn't it included and just melted in with 613 other laws? The reason was these are special. When God wrote these with the finger of God and gave them to Moses to show and read the people, he was to tell them how to build the ark, which he had already given some information, and how to build the ark. And these 10, these stone tablets were to put inside the Ark of the Covenant when they made it. They were special. Now the book of the covenant, which is called also the book of the law, all those other things that Moses wrote down himself, we see that they went into the side, not inside, but they went to the side of the ark and not inside like the 10. The 10 were given differently. So you notice the 10 Commandments is not part of the Old Covenant. Isn't that amazing? And yet they are even more binding because they rise above, as we've seen, all the other 100 or 613. And these are the ones that show how to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, the first 4. Then the last 6 is how to love your neighbor as yourself and do no harm to him. Old Testament rabbis taught that, and we saw that Jesus in Matthew chapter 22 said the same thing, that the greatest of all the commandments is, the first one is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. And the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. These 10 on stone were a reminder how to love God and to serve him and how to treat your fellow man. That's why they stand out, Old Testament and New Testament, as to be so much of the emphasis of how we're to serve God and to treat our fellow man. Old Testament and New Testament. But I want you to see, God made a covenant to them, and we saw that he, in the covenant for verse 4 through verse 8, he made a covenant, he sprinkled the people, he sprinkled the altar, and then in verse 12 he said, Moses, come up here and I will give you 10 things written on a tablet, and I will give them to you for you to teach the Israelites. They were never included in the covenant. These are special. These are standing out above all the others. Now I want you to go with me, if you would, I'm going to ask you, there's some confusion in the church today. I want to throw this in so you'll see. Because of the way the Old Testament is written, in a couple of places, people say God wrote one of the tablets of stone, but Moses wrote the other. And God only wrote one with the finger of God. I want you to see, go to Exodus 31, Exodus chapter 31, and I want you to read or listen to verse 18. Read it if you could get there in time. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made up an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tablets of testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. This was the first ones. Moses took it down, and because of the sins of the people, he threw them down because of their sin, and he broke the tablets. Now then he goes, and I want you to look at this next one, Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy chapter 10, I want you to look at verse 1 through 4. At that time the Lord said unto me, hew thee 2 tablets of stone like unto the first. These are the second set of tablets. And come up unto me into the mount, and make thee an ark of wood. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first 2, which thou breakest, and thou shalt put them in the ark. Now, in verse 4 it says, and he wrote on the tablets according to the first writing, the 10 commandments. It's the 10 words. If you look those up, it's not 10 commandments. It says 10 sayings or 10 words, which the Lord spoke unto you in the mount in the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly, that the Lord gave them unto me. God wrote both of them with his own finger, with these 10. Moses took his quill, and Moses took the scrolls, and he wrote down all the others that God gave him. And it was called the Book of the Covenant. And it was referred to later as the Book of the Law. And he wrote all of those down in a book. But these were not written by Moses. These 10 that were written on stone were written by the finger of God. God wrote in them himself because why? These are special. These are special words, sayings, commandments from God that it shows you the emphasis of how to love him and serve him, first 4. I know I'm repeating myself, but I want you to remember it. And how to love and treat your neighbor, the last 6. This is why they were separated from all the other laws, and that's why in the Old Testament and New Testament, they stand out because of the importance of what they are and the importance of what they say. Now, my friends, I want us to think about something. I want you to see that the Jews, later on, the rest of the storyline, we see, and God tells them, because Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. Moses did something when God didn't like by striking the rock 3 times when he was told to strike it once. And God said, you will not go into the promised land. You will not go with the people. But Joshua will take them over for you. And so God anointed Joshua to take the place of Moses. But God took Moses up into the mountain and he said, look at it, Moses. This is the promised land that you spoke to the people about. And he showed him all of the land. And then God buried Moses there in the mountain. And he took Moses to be with him. So we see that Moses was not allowed to go. But listen to the typology, the spirituality of the word. The law can't get you into the promised land. We're not under the law, we're under grace, the New Testament says. Only Joshua can take you over the Jordan. Only Joshua can take you into the promised land. And the promised land, and if you'll know, Joshua is the Hebrew name for Jesus. And so Joshua, Jesus, can take you over and give you the promises of God. He can give you salvation, but the law can't get you there. Moses gave the law, but truth came from Jesus Christ, the New Testament says. So my friends, please don't lose the storyline. When you read the Bible, when you look at this, you see how plain it is why these 10 stand out from all the others, and that why they were not even though God gave them to them verbally. When Moses came down from the mount and he read the law that he had written, the 10 Commandments haven't even been given yet. And then in the same chapter, he said, come up here and I'll give you 10 sayings on these tablets that you can teach them to the people. These are special. And that's why Jesus in the New Testament takes each one and shows us that they're valid for the church today. Not to earn salvation, but to prove that we have salvation. Because unlike written on stone, the scripture says, the new covenant is written on the hearts of men that they will obey it. So it's in our heart and we say, I want to obey. We get the commandments and we look, and Jesus talks about, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. When he gives us these 9, I'll talk about the 10th one, which is the Sabbath, the very last one. But I want you to see something. That God, when he says this to Moses, the law came by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. The law can't earn salvation. It can only prove that you have salvation from a loving God that chose you from the foundation of the world. I hope you'll reread, think about these. Come back next week, and we'll start looking at one commandment at a time. Lord bless. Thanks for watching.